Thanks very much indeed, Dr. McGarry, giving us some food for thought, overviewing it. I'm afraid I'm the next speaker myself. I'm a political historian of this parish. The role of kind of Ulster Protestants during the 1916 Rising is an interesting one. There are a scattering of northern Protestants, not all of them Unionists, involved in the Rising. We have a man called George Irvine, a school teacher from Enniskillen, who was teaching in a Church of Ireland school in Dublin, who fought at the South Dublin Union under Eamon and was later nominated as a Sinn Féin candidate in 1918. There was, of course, the case of a soldier, a British soldier, former UVF man from Newtonards in County Down, who was killed in the Rising fighting the insurgents, and whose grave I saw recently in the churchyard in Grey Abbey in North Down. But one of the most sensational eyewitness accounts of the 1916 Rising surfaced in Belfast about 15 years ago, having been forgotten for over half a century in a bank deposit box in a bank in the city centre. The 49-page document written in longhand on Gresham Hotel notepaper describes the thrilling experiences of Jim Mitchell, a 38-year-old primary school teacher from the Mount in East Belfast. In the 1911 census, now online, James Mitchell, then aged 34, a school teacher, is recorded as living at 121 The Mount, Mount Pottinger, East Belfast, along with his widowed father, a former ironmoulder, two brothers and a sister. The sister, Mary Isabel, is the Molly, actually, to whom he addressed his entries in this diary in Easter week 1916. The family were Presbyterian. It's clear that Mitchell and his brother Joseph signed the Ulster Covenant in September 1912 at the City Hall. But the story is interesting because James Mitchell decided to join the British Army, but he picked the wrong day, Good Friday, 1916. And he headed down to Dublin with his brother and some friends, making their way to Portobello Barracks to join the military. After taking in a show at the Theatre Royal and an evening socialising at the officers' mess in the barracks, the Belfast man accepted the King's shilling. He writes, "Result, I became a soldier of the King on Easter Sunday." On Easter Monday, the Belfast brothers were dissuaded from joining up right away. They were told to enjoy the spring weather, to go with everybody else to Ferryhouse races. And so on Easter Monday, they joined the middle-class exodus from the capital to Ferryhouse. But it was while there, during the afternoon of Easter Monday, that they heard rumours about, quote, trouble with Sinn Féiners in the city. Mitchell was due to report to his regiment on Thursday, the 27th of April, but was to find himself marooned in the Gresham Hotel in Sackville Street for the duration of the insurrection. It was there that he penned his graphic account of his dramatic experiences in the form of an ever-lengthening letter to his sister in Belfast. In fact, it was never posted. We found it in the bank deposit box in 1990, when the bank was closing in Belfast, York Street. It wasn't until that evening that he realised the seriousness of the situation. The train only brought him as far as Broadstone Station, and he had to walk to the hotel through a nearly deserted city, with signs of fractiousness as he went along. When he got to the Gresham, a Belfast acquaintance reported how he had been stopped in St. Stephen's Green by armed, again that word, Sinn Féiners, who had seized his hired motor car. Anxious to assess the situation for himself, Mitchell slipped out into the street that evening to discover, as he put it, some ghastly sights. His diary records, 2 horses lay opposite the Hammond Hotel, their soldier riders having been shot dead. Human blood covered the footway. The soldiers he referred to were members of a company of lancers who were fired on by the insurgents as they came down Sackville Street early in the occupation of the GPO. The Belfast soldier noted that all police and military were confined to barracks and the mob had complete possession of the principal thoroughfares. He witnessed large-scale looting in Sackville Street. Remember, of course, an injunction was taken by a Lord Lieutenant of Ireland in the 1880s to prevent the official renaming of the main thoroughfare in Dublin, O'Connell Street, although that was the popular designation. It remained Sackville Street until 1922. And he witnessed large-scale looting by men and women whose hands, he wrote, were covered in blood from the shattered shards of glass. That evening, an eerie silence descended on the city centre, where, quote, every building was barricaded and loopholed by the Sinn Féiners, that word again, but all was peaceful within. Life continued more or less normally in the Gresham Hotel, although it was boarded up, of course, from Easter Monday, with the dining room and bars kept busy by what he calls the nerve-shattered guests. At 8 a.m. on Wednesday morning, the 26th of April, Mitchell was awakened by a terrific rattling and roaring nearby. This was caused by the British bombardment of Liberty Hall, James Connolly's headquarters, and in Mitchell's view, quote, the headquarters of all the disaffection. James Connolly's anti-war and socialist republican views were well known. Peering into Sackville Street, the Belfast man noticed 3 dead bodies at Parnell's statue, while he could hear the fit-fit of bullets singing in the air. Later on, the hotel's doors and windows were barricaded, prompting him to write, "We are practically prisoners in this building." A few minutes later, he heard a roaring noise and found Sackville Street enveloped in a bluish smoke and guns rattling away. A boat of some kind, he recorded, was at O'Connell Bridge and is evidently the cause of the loud reverberations. This, of course, referred to the shelling of the rebel strongholds by the British gunboat, the Helga, operating from the Liffey. Yet, as Mitchell records, the rebel headquarters remained intact. I quote, "The GPO was still solidly square, and flying on top of the portico was the flag of the Irish Republic." As a raw military recruit, Mitchell could not help musing that "I had got a damned fine reception into the army," and he added, "when and how I reached the barracks is wrapped in mystery." It's interesting that telecommunication contact continued between the Gresham Hotel and British barracks throughout the week of the Rising. On the Thursday of Easter week, he received a phone call from a British officer reporting serious fighting close to Portobello Barracks. This was, of course, the Battle of Mount Street Bridge, which caused the mass of British casualties, over 200 casualties, many fatalities of the Rising, as troops marched from Kingstown to reinforce the Dublin garrison. Later that day, Mitchell recorded seeing a man shot dead in Sackville Street, while inside the hotel, food supplies were running low and electric light was cut off. While playing solo, he heard a shell explode opposite the building. As the smoke cleared, he witnessed an extraordinary scene. Now, he describes this amazing scene which he watched as the British were, surrounding the insurgent strongholds with a ring of steel. And now 18-pounder guns were applying their hardware against the GPO and other buildings in O'Connell Street. And he noticed that the gunners were targeting a building directly opposite the Gresham Hotel. He writes, "The door of the Blind Institute opened, and a man emerged with a Union Jack wrapped around him, really wrapped up in a Union Jack, running into the middle of the street. The figure ran pluckily towards a British 18-pounder field gun in the middle of the road. To Mitchell's amazement, the man had a conversation with the gunners and was allowed to return to the Institute while the gunners turned their weapons in another direction." As the military cordon tightened around the rebel outposts, Jim Mitchell's pro-British outlook surfaced for the first time, because this was a very objective, non-partisan account of what he saw and heard throughout Easter week. He wrote, "I felt relief and secretly exulted at the inglorious end of the creatures with such mean and selfish minds." At 4 p.m. on Saturday, following Pearse's surrender, Mitchell witnessed the surrender of 500 Sinn Féiners, as he put it, who decommissioned their rifles on the road outside the hotel. By Monday morning, a week after the outbreak, Jim Mitchell rose to find the streets of Dublin crowded with sightseers and patrolled by lancers. walking towards St. Stephen's Green, he was astonished by the surrounding devastation and what he termed the trenches which had been dug up by Sinn Féiners in the Green itself. The work, of course, of the Irish Citizen Army under Michael Mallon and the rebel Countess Constance Markievicz. Dublin was now under martial law, under the administration of General Sir John Maxwell, who organised the court-martials and subsequently the executions. But on Thursday, the Belfast man obtained passes for himself and 2 companions to return home from the military governor. Miraculously, they managed to retrieve their car and return to a peaceful Belfast. His fascinating memoir ends, "All our experiences seem now to be those of a dream. Everything that had passed within the past 12 days has the impression of unreality." And the diary ends finally, "And now to bed and sweet repose at 112 The Mount, East Belfast, April 1916. Now, my research has really traced the final sort of outworking of James Mitchell's military career, because there was a strong temptation to believe that since this diary lay unclaimed for 70 years in a bank deposit box in Royal Avenue, that he had perished in the Great War. In fact, I have just discovered that he served as a lieutenant in the Royal Army Service Corps, a non-fighting unit. He was sent to Mesopotamia in October 1917. He was the recipient of 3 medals, and he survived the war and was recorded living at the Mount in 1920. Thank you very much.